All right, looks like we are here at 9 o'clock. So we're gonna get this party started. All right, the way I'm gonna start this out is we did watch the videos on cleaning and sanitation. Then I'm gonna do a quick lecture, well, as quick as I can, on the riveting topic of HACCP and all the compliance things that you sort of need to be doing. It's definitely not the most exciting topic to cover, but we'll do our darndest to keep it at least moderately entertaining. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Guys, all see that okay?
Great.
Let me figure out how to minimize this down a little bit so I can still see the chat. Well, feel free to type in if you have some questions. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and go through this. We're talking about a little bit about HACCP and how that works in the winery. So let's see if we can advance my screen. There we go. All right, so what I'm going to do talk about is FSMA a little bit, and then go through the concept of HACCP and how we apply that in a winery. So here's the Food Safety Management Act. This was passed back in 2011. They really haven't enforced it tremendously, but they're starting to. And so this is what it says. Each individual engaged in manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding of food, including temporary or seasonal personnel or the supervision thereof, must have education, training, or experience, or a combination thereof, necessary to manufacture, process, pack, or hold clean, safe food as appropriate as individuals and assign duties and receive training in the principles of food hygiene, food safety, including the importance of employee health and personal hygiene as appropriate to the food, the facility, and the individuals assigned duties. Additional qualifications for supervisory personnel, records that document the training, then subpart B, which is good manufacturing practices, sanitary facilities controls, and subpart F, record keeping. My wife is a government inspector for the Oregon Department of Ag, and she says, I don't see what's a big deal about that. But when I read this, my brain goes completely scrambled. I'm unable to process government ease. It's a talent for some people. So I'm going to put this in normal speak. So basically what you need to do is you need to get some training on how to clean. You need to write down what you do, and you need to document it. You have to have things called SOPs, standard operating procedures. Every winery needs to have one, at least for cleaning. How you mix up your chemicals. The first SOP you should write is actually an SOP on how to write an SOP, which is so government. But then after you do that, you'll want to have one at least for cleaning and sanitation of your various pieces of equipment, what types of chemicals you're going to use and how you're going to use them. Then keep some records of all your cleaning and your fruit handling. You should be doing this anyway. It shouldn't be a big deal. So I'm going to talk about documentation, the documentation requirement. Basically, the FDA says if it's not written down, it did not happen. So you must have objective evidence that your product is made and tested correctly. So you're going to have incoming numbers of your fruit quality. We'll talk about that in a second. We're going to have some sort of written down numbers for some chemistry specifications to make sure that they're matching. Basically, your tech sheets, pH, TA, for sure ethanol, that's absolutely required by law. And then also some logs to show that you're maintaining your equipment. So forklift logs, I know we're all keeping those daily, doing our daily checks on every forklift before we get on. I know we're daily doing our
Yep.
I'm sure everybody's doing this every time, right? So make sure everything's working correctly. But there should be, we need to have some log, some documentation that we're doing this. So here are the ones that the FDA really requires. You have critical documentation of your fruit receival and transport. When was the fruit picked? Who was it picked by? How was it transported to the winery? And what day was that done? And how much weight did you have? That's required. It's required by the TTD anyway. If you're not recording this, you're in big trouble. But let alone the FDA wants to know very specifically how that fruit was transported and who was brought it. But most fruit should be being transported with a bill of lading. It's a basic requirement. So every time you get some fruit in, just have a sheet of paper, address of vineyard, how is it transported, how many pounds did you bring in? Pretty straightforward. You're going to have some QA on the front end. This is a bit of an excessive one. It was just one I grabbed because I had a quick chance to do a screenshot. But bare minimum, you're going to want to have incoming bricks, acidity, and pH. Especially pH is particularly important to the FDA. When we start getting over pH 4.0, we start playing in a different realm. And some of the discussion I've heard amongst regulators is that they're just fine with most things in wine because the pHs are always below 4. But in modern winemaking, and a lot of types of wine that I'm seeing being made, particularly in one of the sub-AVAs of the Walla Walla Valley, wines start at pH 4.0. And the thing is when you start at pH 4.0, things like listeria and botulism can live in that environment. And they can't live for long once alcohol gets started, but they create some byproducts that may not be savory. So there may be some regulation eventually around how we test for wines that are above pH 4.0, which was kind of unheard of in the wine industry until, maybe 10, 15 years ago, but that seems to be a growing trend. So you're going to have to keep maintain some chemistry on your incoming, some QA. You obviously don't need all the phenolic data. The FDA doesn't care about that, but basically you're going to want to know your incoming sugar, acid, and that's kind of bare minimum. But we can test for that really easily. You can do titratable acidity easy in-house, and you can easily measure bricks in-house. These are not complicated things. If you're not measuring those, we probably shouldn't be making them. Other things we have to do is we have to track all of our additions. So this is a spreadsheet copy of what I do. This is how I track for the small wineries. Larger wineries that I work with, we work with like VinTrace out of custom crush facilities. Having a nice wine tracking program is nice, but I find with the wine tracking programs in smaller facilities that a lot of times I end up doing more work keeping the database working than I would just running things in an Excel spreadsheet. So there's a certain kind of break point. It's probably around 20 wines that it gets easier to have a wine tracking software. But the thing is about wine tracking software is really the idea of what I call GIGO, is garbage in, garbage out. So unless you're going to manage that database and do a really good job of it, perhaps it's better to at least use a spreadsheet. Now I go to a lot of wineries that have the notebook, and I bet there are a few of there that are giggling right now because you have the notebook that has the dirty pages that have the things written down. Well, as long as it's written down, it's done, and that's okay. Just make sure you're writing down. But I go to a lot of wineries that don't have a notebook. They don't have a diary. They don't have a log. They don't have anything. You are wildly out of compliance, and not only by the Tax Trade Bureau, they'll whack you for that because everything has to be traceable. But additionally, the FDA will really go after you because they want to know all the products that you put into the wine, and you really should. So if you have an issue, you can get to it. Let me see. Yeah. So yes, you need to have. Now I've heard some arguments that lot number is okay, but one thing I do that I don't have here is whenever I add something, I take a picture with my phone and put it in my Google Drive of the lot code, and so I keep all my lot codes filed on just in photos. And then I drag and drop sometimes just the lot code into the folder. So that's something you can do too if you don't want to type it all out. But you're going to have to have lot codes for everything that you use, and have that all written down because you need to have product traceability. Next one. Come on. So one of the things you also want to keep is you'll want to keep the technical data sheet for everything you add to the wine. So it's Go Firm, you want to keep that added. And then also you need to have your MSDSs on file. This is also basic OSHA stuff. Anything you're adding to the wine, anything that touches the wine, any chemical in the building, any gases in the building, you need to have a binder on hand with everything that you use in it. And that's not only occupational health and safety, that is a Fed requirement and a TTB requirement. Chat here. Okay, cool. So keep all of your, so anytime you get a new product in the building, even if it's oak chips, you got to get the technical data sheet and the MSDS, and you got to put it in a folder. It's just required. If you walk, and if the even if OSHA walks in, you need to have that right away, or you'll get dinged for that. And that's not just FDA, that's multiple agencies. Let's see here. Having some issues getting my slides to advance. Okay, the other critical documentation is cleaning. I don't know very many wineries that actually do this, and we are sort of required to. So anytime that you start up your distimmer, you need to have the employee sign off that they followed the SOP for cleaning the distimmer. And now whatever your SOP looks like, it's going to be different for every winery. Is it a pressure wash? Is it clean through with chemical? But every time before you start up processing, your whole processing line has to be shown that it's clean. Now, us in the wine industry, we're like, oh my God, that's terrible. But could you imagine thinking about like processing potatoes? How would you feel if you didn't know that your potatoes that were coming in from the grocery store didn't have logs on the line, or your meat packing line? People are packing meat. So you think that you're a food processor. Kind of get out of the idea that we make wine and we have this thing called fermentation to save our ass, because think of yourself as a food processor. They're going to think of you as in the same way. So, you know, you're going to want to pretend that your line is going to be packing things that are going to go to people that could possibly spoil. So cleaning your line and everything is just as important as the dairy industry, making sure that all their pipes and everything are clean, and the pasteurization process is happening and all being documented in order to get that, you know, milk safely to the grocery store. You got to put yourself sort of in that mindset. So realistically, you need to have a little sheet that shows every time you did a startup that day, you check off that you did it. And it just could be a checklist, but it was done and then signed off by who. Could be as simple as like, you know, the porta potties, there's a little checklist that says this bathroom was cleaned by, just that's it. And just have that kind of hanging on the wall. So it could be signed off that it was done before you start up every time. So those are the critical documents. Do you have any questions about those before I move on? Feel free to type in the chat. Good. Yeah, it's riveting, I know. Now I'll talk about the concept of HACCP. This is something that I've kind of taken on as part of the way that I make wine. It was something that was a little bit challenging for me to really wrap my head around starting out, but now that I kind of incorporated into my existence as a winemaker and consultant, it really helps out. So HACCP is Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. So let's go through and talk about what that means. So we're going to talk about the critical issues. So what are our hazards? What are the things that we worry about? So I'm going to show you some things that might worry us and things I've seen in wineries over the years. This is a bung, and this might be a hazard that we see. We might see that there's some dirty stuff on a press that needs to be cleaned. And we might see mold growing, you know, on the corner of a tank. And we might, you know, even see some really crazy things like a dead rat in the drain. These are things I took all at First Growth Chateaus in Bordeaux. So if that doesn't kind of surprise you a little bit, it should. So we have to look at our critical issues. And I've got some, let's see, copies of SOPs I can share. I do have some. Let me see if I can find some that I had, because I've got a whole folder of them. Yeah, I'll send one along, a sample one along for you to look at. I sent over this PDF to Ashley. I'll send over one to you, then she can distribute it to everybody. And then this is another interesting one right here. This one in the top corner is actually a winery that I went to, and I walked in the door, and immediately they brought me in as a consultant because one bottle in every single case of their Riesling was re-fermenting. One bottle in every case. And I looked at the owner and I said, "You have a 12-head bottle filler, don't you?" And he goes, "Yeah, how'd you know we have a 12-head bottle filler?" I said, "Let's go check the seats." And this is one of the seats that the bottle would go up against and the bottle filler. So what would happen is they would steam the line, but they would lift the seats up and out. This one had been obviously pretty well damaged and had a nice little dose of yeast or whatever on it. And so every time a bottle got filled on that line, on that seat, it got 2 or 3 yeast cells added to it and it re-fermented. So these are the things that we look at that we think of as critical issues. So these are the hazards that we're worried about. And then what kind of limits are we going to put on these hazards? How much of this are we going to allow to exist in our winery? And that's really kind of a personal thing. I know it sounds crazy, but here's the hazard. So, sorry, my computer's just automatically advancing for some reason. So what's our hazards? Realistically, in the wine industry, everything. We're a mess. I mean, we have messes. That's what we do. Grape juice is our hazard. It grows everything. It's food. It's delicious. Everything wants to eat it. You like it. I like grape juice. My kid likes grape juice. And microbes certainly like grape juice. They're going to grow in it. So our hazard is everywhere. And it's just the fact that we have microbes, we have sugar, and we have a really great opportunity for things to grow. So that's really our hazard. And then what are we going to analyze? You know, what's our analysis that, this is really kind of, I don't know why it's auto playing. What's our, so then we have our hazard, we know what it is. And then we have to decide what is going to be our analysis for cleanliness. So what do we do to analyze that our winery is clean? And so the thing that we do to analyze that our winery is clean is we use our eyes. We go in and we look, is it clean? So I look at this picture and I go, yeah, the winery's clean. I don't see any grape skins on the floor. I don't see any grape juice. Everything's organized, everything's straight. This is enough of my analysis. So just literally doing a walkthrough that the winery is clean is good enough. Sticking your head in the tank and saying, I did a visual check for cleanliness. So how do we come along again? Sorry, don't know why my computer's just decided to advance for me. So what would we do in order to get our staff and our people up to speed on deciding on what that critical control point is? And that's what we're doing right now. We're doing training. So we're talking about cleaning, we're talking about sanitations, we're talking about what are the limits that we're going to allow in our winery. So you're going to walk your staff and you're walking through. And if you're just the staff, you're going to walk yourself through. You're going to look at your hot spots. So tank valves, tasting valves, and drains are the hottest spots in every winery. Also, bung holes are really dirty. You'd be surprised at how much grows around the outside. One of the things that I really recommend, and if you really want to improve your wine quality, is before you open the bung hole, always spray around that outside with ethanol, because you've got a vacuum and you've got everything growing around the outside. And as soon as you pull that bung, everything that's nasty on the outside goes right into your wine. And that's all acetobacter. It's all growing around the outside edge and you pull it in your wine. So these are the hot spots. So establish what you're willing to see. I know. I did it in PowerPoint. I don't know. I think what happened is what I did is I had pre-recorded this as a YouTube lecture once upon a time. And then I took them all out so I could give this to you. And I think it's just deciding for me on the timing because that's why they're a little different. Anyway, we want to set some critical limits. How dirty are we willing to let our drains get? How dirty? I mean, there's got to be a level that we get to that we'll accept for dirtiness. Will we want them cleaned out every night and polished clean? Do we want to sanitize their drains every night? I know wineries that do that. They take out every single drain filter every single night, sanitize it, and put it back in every day. I know wineries that maybe do it twice a year. Again, the fact of the matter is that you're doing it, you're documenting it, and you're keeping track of it. That's what the FDA is going to care for. And also just having those SOPs and then somebody signing off on it, taking responsibility. They want to show that people are taking responsibility for their sanitation and cleaning. And then, we have to have some point of corrective action. So when do we make a corrective action? And I take a look at this fermenter, and this is time to make a corrective action. We have something that's not sanitary here. I can think of a few things that look sort of unsanitary about this. We've got some dirty harvest, lugs on top, holding a submerged cap down, and we've got wine running all over the parking lot. So there might be some things that we would want to do to correct this action. Maybe take some wine out of the fermenter, maybe clean things up. And then also with cleanliness, almost everything's visual. There isn't really any major test in terms of our cleanliness that we need to back up. When we get sanitation, that's going to change a little bit. But we just want to look for these things. We look for tar traits. We look for biofilms. Again, dirty drains, sampling valves are notoriously bad. Oh, the worst are if you have the tanks that you open a little valve on the side to show the level. So you open the valve and then wine shoots up the little glass or plastic tube so you can see how much is in there. Then people close that and then all sorts of stuff starts growing in it. And then as you're draining the tank, you forgot to close the valve and it all drains back in to your wine and mixes in there. That's really quality stuff. Definitely guilty. All these things I'm guilty of, so don't think I'm castigating. I mean, I've done all of these things. So if things aren't clean, we just take corrective action, and it's just important to instill this culture of cleanliness in our wineries. So keys to good HACCP. 7 principles. We conduct a risk analysis. What is the risk of cleanliness we're willing to have? How much are we willing to take on board? Everything in winemaking is risk management. It's all like, how much am I willing to take on board? Am I willing to risk having my wine go off? Or am I willing to risk a little bit more so I can have more terroir expression, or whatever that is? And then we have to identify our critical control points. What is the place that we're going to have to make a change? Establish those values. How dirty are we willing to let things be? And then we monitor it, and then basically we review it, and then we fill out the documents. That's about it. It's really pedantic and annoying, but if you have some sort of HACCP plan in place and you at least speak the language, you're going to be way ahead of the regulators when they show up. Now, also realize one other thing that's really important, and this is a real key, because I've had a couple of wineries that have gone under audit for this. And it's weird because one of the audits I went to, the auditor was straight off a crab boat in Alaska, and she had never audited a winery before. And so she came in, basically how she'd audit a meatpacking plant. And the first thing she said is, you got to shut this whole thing down. And I said, why are we going to shut it down? She goes, your processing equipment's outside. I'm like, yeah, so? And she goes, well, a bird could shit in the hopper. And you could, then you could get, all this stuff. And I was like, here, let me show you the grapevine. We walk her over to the grapevine and there's just birds in the grapevines, and I was like, well, what difference does it make if they do it there or they do it on the crush pad? I mean, we're going to take this all through fermentation. So you're going to have there's a good chance if a regulator does come to audit you, you're going to have to guide them on your cleaning processes. If you show that you're using the process of HACCP, you will automatically be ahead of the game. You're already taking corrective action. Here's all of our processes. And then basically you get to say that all of the bad stuff gets destroyed during fermentation. So we don't have to worry about that. And so that's helpful, but if you just show that you're doing the right stuff, they'll really let you off the hook. So sanitation is a little different. So I'm gonna cleanliness, just some cleaning, basic documentation. The only time we really worry about sanitation is when we're worried about microbes. So in this particular instance, our hazard with sanitation is microbes. Acetobacter, Brettanomyces, Gluconobacter, all these different bugs. It can't even just be good old-fashioned yeast if we're trying to make a sweet wine. So for sanitation, we're going to have to do a little bit more detail for our record keeping. So our analysis for sanitation is that we can do a couple of things. Most of the wineries I work at, I'm using pasteurization. If I'm going to be working on a really sanitary wine before bottling, and if we want to document that, we just document our time and temperature for the bottling line. So in our case, we just get out a thermometer. As soon as the bottling line hits, whatever it is, 200 degrees, we set the timer, and in 20 minutes, we know that bottling line is sterile. Some wineries use ATP swabs, and they use them on everything, even during their cleaning and sanitation process. One of my friends works at North Star Winery. They do ATP swabs on absolutely every equipment before they move wine into it. They're a $3,000 machine. Not sure it's in everybody's budget to be doing that, but very effective way to be checking for, to make sure that your wine is completely clean. If you are bottling a lot of wine and you're regularly running a line, it's not a bad idea to get an ATP swab and monitor your line before you start bottling, especially if you're bottling sweet wine. This is a pretty small investment to make sure that your wines are absolutely sterile. So And then here's some recommendations for bottling lines. I'll send this along. This is from 1989. And the great thing about pasteurization, it had only been invented a year before, or 100 years before, and the rules still hold. So once you get that bottling line to 200 degrees, about 20 minutes in, it's going to be sterile. Now, when you do measure that, 200 degrees, measure that at the thickest, heaviest piece of metal at the end of the bottling line. Once that hits the temperature, then you're there. So in this particular case, we wouldn't be measuring it right by the, we wouldn't be measuring it right by the filter. We're going to measure it on the valve at the far end of the bottling line. And that's going to allow us to know that's the piece that's the last thing to get hot. So that's where you want to make sure that you'll get that steam to that temperature, is at that outside heaviest edge. So again, our critical control points.
So where's our critical control point? We have training.
So this one in particular, we have to have our training. Critical limits, there are no limits, none. Like that means we can't have any microbes, none. They're all dead. So like it's pretty easy. It's a 0, and we got to get there. For bottling, it's a 0. Especially for, like I said, anything that's got some residual sugar on it. Unless you're using the magical thing called Velcrin, then you then you can change. But we'll talk about Velcrin later if you want to. And again, just setting up some SOPs for your bottling line sanitation. We are going to hook up the steamer. We're going to steam it for 20 minutes. And then you're going to sign off on that. And this is easy to do too, because you need to have a bottling form. Every wine you bottle has to have a bottling form. It's got to have your wine name, your cola, it's got to have the bottles, your volumes at the beginning and end. And you've got to, by the way, if you're bottling, every time, like every, whatever the amount is, 50 cases, 20 cases, 100 cases, you need to be pulling samples and measuring for volume at the bare minimum. You need to make sure you're getting volumes at every 50 cases. I know everybody's pulling every time to check their volumes, but by law, every, about 50 cases, you need to pull a bottle and check at least for volume. The easiest way to do that is to weigh a bottle, get the specific gravity of the wine, run the wine through on the weighed bottle that goes through the bottling line, and then you take it and put it on a scale, and you can calculate the weight of your wine. It's much easier than pouring volumes because it's harder to get it that way. But we got for sparkling wine, those volumes are always at. So you technically don't bottle sparkling wine technically until you degorge it. It's still in bulk process. So it's not till you degorge, because then you know the volume of the wine. And it's and with sparkling wine, it's actually about the only weight is almost the only way to get a volume, because you can't pour it in a tube without making a huge mess. So sparkling wine, it almost has to entirely be done by weight. There we go. And that should do that. Let's see here. Click over to again. So again, our monitoring and recording. I send any wine in that has any residual sugar for a scorpion. And scorpions are good and bad. I know I'm a technical consultant for ETS, so take that for what it is. I know that that's, so I give my disclosures, but I would still do this anyway, because it's kind of basic quarantine due diligence. So anytime you've got sugar, you've got a chance for something to re-ferment. So we send it in for a bottling scorpion. Now, if you look at these ones on the right, where we had some RVM and some Riesling that we had done, or Agave, they had a little bit of residual sugar, but we had gotten a strike on the scorpion that said we had bacteria. The problem is with scorpions are limited. Scorpions only measure DNA. So what scorpions do is like the equivalent, the best way I've heard this described is that, say you're walking along on the beach and all of a sudden a foot washes up, just somebody's foot. Well, a scorpion analysis would say that's a real living person, because all it sees is the DNA. It doesn't mean that person's alive and well. So in the case of, malolactic, we'll talk about malolactic in a second. So what you want to do is send in for a plating. And plating is better because it tells you what's viable. Scorpions are faster and they're cheaper, but they will sometimes send a false positive back to you. They don't always work out. Incomplete mallow, white wine, as long as your total sulfur is over 50 or 60 parts. In a red wine, you better make sure your mallow is complete. If you're not going to sterile filter, because white wine, total sulfur will always stay high. So as long as your total sulfur is over 60, it won't precipitate. There's nothing precipitating total sulfur dioxide. Total sulfur dioxide inhibits malolactic fermentation. Red wine, problem. Sulfur dioxide, the way that sulfur works is it's an indirect antioxidant, indirect. So what happens is it binds as oxygen works its way into the wine, which it will. Your wine will chemically oxidize. The ethanol will chemically oxidize to a compound called acetaldehyde. Sulfur dioxide will bind to acetaldehyde. Most of the time, most of the bound sulfur in your wine is bound to acetaldehyde. And so what will eventually happen is that acetaldehyde also binds to tannins. And eventually the tannins get big enough that they precipitate along with the sulfur. So on red wine, after about 5 years, you've got no more free sulfur. So if you have an incomplete malolactic fermentation in a red wine, you can have it start popping off after about 5 years in bottle. You think you're all fine and done and everything's dandy, and all of a sudden things start re-fermenting and it'll start going through mallow again. And the worst case scenario for that is if you had a red wine with residual sugar and malolactic bacteria, because then what's going to happen is that malolactic bacteria is going to eat the sugar and they're going to make volatile acidity. And you're going to basically sell your customers a bottle of preloaded vinegar. So red wines, generally recommended that you complete malolactic fermentation, generally recommended, or use sterile filter them. If you don't complete them, sterile filter them, or use Velcro. If you want to use a sterilant. I mean, if you want to sleep at night, Velcro spray. I'm not saying it's the end all be all. It's a little terrifying because it is poison, but it does a fantastic job of making sure you don't have to worry about those things. And there are mobile units out there that will come out to your winery on bottling day too, which is a thing. Not saying that you should do that, but just saying it's something you can do if you're adverse to sterile filtration. But if you're gonna go to bottle with some nebulous levels of sulfur and anything that can be re-fermented, gotta be really careful. All right. So HACCP plan is critical to the winery. The thing is, it doesn't have to be complicated. Don't make it complicated. You just don't. Keep it as simple as possible because it has to be something you'll do. If you make it too complicated, you won't do it. So it just has to be simple and then kind of the bare minimum of what you think needs to be done for SOPs for cleaning, for sure for cleaning, and then how to, the startup procedure for your bottling line. Just write it down. And this is the startup procedure. That's it. That's your SOP. It's just your startup procedure. We get it out, we hot water rinse, we run chemical through it. Then we verify that it's clean. And then you just have a little sign-off sheet in your lab that says, okay, before we started, so-and-so did the thing, to make sure that it's clean before we ran. So keep it simple. The thing I will always say again is just keep it simple, stupid, but know the verbiage and the language, because that'll be really helpful when you run into an inspector. And also just, it's good practice. I mean, it's really important to have good practice in a winery. And I just can't stress that enough. It's just like, do the things. It's not that hard. Do the thing. Don't skip a step. So at the end of the day, I just say, so keep records. Here's the records that you have to have. Fruit receivable Q&A, manufacturing logs, cleaning logs, and write and maintain some SOPs. And reality is just do it. That's sort of it for HACCP. I know it's riveting, and thank you for tuning in on a Wednesday morning to get that boring pile of stuff from you. Thank you for that. And now I'll move into any, unshare my screen.
Tim Harless from Hat Ranch.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. What about a daily checklist that might have all these cleaning things and we just check off that we did it that day and just stick it in a 3-ring binder?
Absolutely, that's perfect.
Okay.
Let me, I'm trying to get my screen to unshare. There we go. It's up in my, there we go. Stop share. There we go. Yeah, no, just a daily checklist. And that covers it. It's that simple. You know, and then it can be, and it can be just, just as simple as, you know, you don't even have to do it every day because not every day you run it. It's only the days you're running. Best cleaning agent for the outside of the barrel. Well, I use a combination of a few things. First thing I like, a personal thing, I'm a big fan of O'Sullivan's Mildewoicide. You can buy it from like Davison Winery Supply. Here, I'll type it in the chat so that it's written down. It's O'Sullivan. I think I spelled it right. And it's a stain. And the reason I like it is because you stain the barrel and it keeps any molds and mildews from growing on the barrel. So if you run a little higher humidity in your barrel room, you won't grow those molds and mildews on the outside of the barrel. The other thing it seems to do is it cuts evaporation by about 25, 30%. We don't lose as much to the angels, which is nice. And then on top of that, what we'll do is we get a nice coating on the outside. It looks like polyurethane. And that way, when your interns overflow the barrels, they don't stain. And you just wash things off, keeps them really clean. Or you, because you're distracted and you're giving a tour and you forgot the pump was on. Not that I've ever done anything like that. But those things are, that's really nice. So stain your barrels with O'Sullivan's Mildewoicide, big fan of it. On the outside of the barrel, generally I use a lot of ethanol because I like ethanol for its ability to sanitize things really well. But in order to keep things pretty, if you do want to like not deal with the staining and you do want the barrels to be natural, sulfur, just straight up potassium metabisulfite, sulfur dioxide, just wipe it on and it'll bleach it out. But do not do citric and sulfur because the sulfur goes away, it leaves the citric behind. You want to know how you get mold on your barrels? Because you put citric on it. So one of the things I'm going to be pretty like forceful about is try to get citric out of your wineries, unless you want a lot of extra growth of mold and mildews, or you want diacetyl in your wine or beer. If you want your beer to get all buttery, put a little citric acid in there with some mallow and it'll get buttery. Same with beer, or same with wine. So citric acid is the pathway that we get diacetyl from. So to mention that we can use on incomplete malolactic, you have to have a doser done, but it's a product called Velcrin. It's by Scott Labs, and it's actually a compound. The compound itself is actually this. Dimethyl dicarbonate is what it's known as. And what Velcrin does, is dimethyl dicarbonate does, is it's a sterilant. It kills everything in the wine. You have to add it at bottling. It has to be metered in tiny little doses, 20, 30 parts per million into wine. And it breaks down into trace amounts of methanol and formaldehyde, which are already in your wine anyway. No, it sounds horrifying. It sounds terrible. And yes, it's poison. It kills things. But it breaks down to trace amounts that are well lower than are already in your wine anyway. And so it goes through on the way to the bottom line, and it acts as a antimicrobial. So what it can do is it allows you to bottle sweet wines without being worried. So the question is like, oh my God, we use this in the wine industry. That's terrible. It's the worst thing ever. Well, yes, but it's already in everything. And I mean everything, everything. We don't have to put it on the label because it's not in the wine anymore. And they don't have to put it on all the sport drinks. Every bottle of Monster Energy drink, every can of Monster Energy drink, every bottle of Gatorade, every bottle of every single thing that you can go buy at the store that is got some sugar in it has probably had dimethyl dicarbonate added to it. It is just in everything because it's such an effective tool, and it's very fairly inexpensive as a wine sterilant. So one of the things that it's useful for, and I don't want to sound like I'm proselytizing for it because I don't think it's necessary. And I'm also, in the grand scheme of things, would like to be a very hands-off, kind of non-intervention, low intervention winemaker. Don't want to do too much. But But what it's really helpful for, especially as we're getting better at making really big red wines, really big, tannic, intense, structured wines, one of the problems we're running into with modern filtration is the tannins that we're making are so big, they're as big as a microbe, and we're filtering out some of our hard-earned tannin. So our big, beautiful, chunky cabs can actually end up getting filtered down and have tannins filtered out. I'm usually a big proponent of filtration, but in this modern wine world where we've created wines that are kind of otherworldly in terms of structure, sometimes you have to use a little something to make up for your inability to filter. So the thing is, you can't just pour dimethyl bicarbonate in. So where have I run into it? So modern crossflow at supposedly like 0.22, 0.25 nominal. And I've had cabs go from 1,500 milligrams liter of tannin down to 800, like half the tannin gone. And then we drain the permeate out of the filter. It's just black. All the tannin is in, and color is in the filter. It looks like mega purple coming out the bottom of the filter, and it's just stuck. It's not making it through the membranes. So we're going to have to get better. They're getting better with the membranes. We're going to have to get better membranes with crossflow. So especially in order to deal with some of these bigger reds.
Tim, and one question: what on a plate and frame are you seeing a certain level of filtration that you're losing those tannins?
No, plate and frames don't seem. They have other issues, but I don't seem to see those issues with plate and frame at the 0.46 micron that you do with the diatomaceous earth. You do lose some aroma and some other stuff that gets stuck to the filters, but crossflows, they're unexplored topic that we need to start talking about with crossflows. But plate and frame still seems to get, you can still plate and frame a wine, a big red, without worrying about it. You got me for another 15 minutes. Any stupid questions? No stupid questions.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Jamie, Why Not Winery. Going back to the cleaning process, on using caustics to clean your tank, bottling line, for whatever, and then rinsing with the citric. I listening to the earlier videos and been aware of citric can be a problem. What's a alternative rinse?
So generally, peracetic acid has been really popular. And the reason that I like peracetic is nothing eats it. And then you get that extra dose of peroxide. The downside to peracetics is that it's really high in peroxide before you mix it. So the concentrated peracetic, you have to wear safety gloves and you have to wear goggles. I watched a girl lose her eyesight in New Zealand getting splashed in the eye with concentrated peracetic. So peracetic is what we generally recommend. But you could also use, if you wanted to stay like classic, you like to smell sulfur and choke on sulfur, because I think there's like this certain level of masochism in the wine industry that we like to hurt ourselves. And if it's necessary for you to do that, just change from citric to tartaric as your rinse.
Okay.
That'll do it.
Tartaric?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Okay, I got too many questions, Tim. Sorry. So the manufacturer recommends the citric rinse on the plate and frame, but how am I going to explain to my regulator that I'm altering from the manufacturer's recommendation?
Well, that doesn't scare me as much because you're going to rinse it out, but because it's not going to end up on the floor. But yeah, you just need to have some sort of acid to what they call change the zeta potential of the pad. But you could use tartaric as well. Just say, hey, I'm not willing to risk having citric in my filtration. But again, you're rinsing that out. The problem I have with the rinses in tanks and in general in the wineries, it ends up on the floor, it ends up under the tank, it ends up all over your winery, and then you get this opportunity for stuff to grow. So I don't see it as a big of an issue as a processing aid because you're going to rinse it out. But when we're splashing citric all over, that's where you get all those floor molds. You stop using it, you go to parasitic, you'll be amazed. Like the floor is just, everything just gets clean. It's just it's kind of extensive, but it does make a difference. The reason I like parasitic is you can smell it. You know that your staff did the job. And it's not sulfur. I don't need any more lung damage from sulfur. I breathed enough in my days. Yeah, cross-flow filtration's fine. As long as you just keep it in the filter and you're going to rinse it down the drain. The problem I have is that we're spraying it all over the winery. Again, for short-term cross-flow filtration storage, it's fine. As a matter of fact, citric and tartaric both work just fine. Tartaric's just a little bit more expensive. But it also on cleaning for cross-flows, anybody's really interested, there's a lot of these new enzymatic cleaners that are bomb. They're awesome from like Scott Labs for cleaning cross-flows. So big fan of using some of those, been able to regenerate cross-flows that we thought were gone. So there's some pretty neat stuff out there. But yeah, storage, for storage of stuff that you're going to rinse out, where you're going to get rid of it. But it's just that when we start putting it on, spraying it all over the winery, I just see it, floors get a lot cleaner when we get out of it. And the hose rinsing and sanitizing in place of citric, just use tartar. Just switch to tartar. That's all. Nothing eats it. Parasitic is what we use. I use everywhere. I'm a big fan of parasitic, but if people are just against it because they don't like the smell, and I fought parasitic for years because I just thought it was too new. I was too resistant, but now I can't imagine functioning without it. You can reach me with questions later, winemakertim@gmail.com. I'm easy to find. Just I'll type it in here. I did not know that. Thank you, Corey. Yeah, chlorine is, no fun. I've been finding a lot of, actually, interestingly enough, I've been fighting a lot of tribromanisol in wineries lately, getting shipments. A lot of the shipping containers, they bromate. And I've had 2 wineries that have gotten concrete tanks that just smell like cork taint. We get them tested and they were full of TBA, tribromanisol. So something to check for if you're bringing in concrete tanks and barrels, check them, smell them, because I guess they've been bromating shipping containers more than normal, I guess, for whatever reason, and just something to be aware of for contamination issues. Something's popped up on my radar. Hopefully you don't have that problem. It sucks to ship back $20,000 concrete fermenters. It's not very environmentally friendly. So anyway, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, I think you'll confer like a certificate to you. You've done your training for the year. Congratulations. You're all government certified cleaning specialists now. And like I said, reach out anytime for questions, and hope you all have a great day.